Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you all for coming out tonight. This is a kind of an experiment for us and for Shakespeare and Company in doing this sort of hybrid, a little bit in person, a lot of bit online. But we thought we would give it a try. We're here tonight to launch our newest book from this series that I edit for Boiler House Press, which is based in the UK. I live here in Missoula, though, so it's an experiment. It's an example of life in the virtual world. My publisher and I think, actually have seen each other face to face across the table once in the last 5+ years.
You need to get to UK more often.
I would love to. Yeah, it's a little pricey though. Um, so we're going to be launching this book, Vengeance is Mine by Friedrich Torberg, which is a bit of an unusual project for us because most of the books in our series, the Recovered Book series, which I edit, are books that have been their English language books or the books that were translated sometime in the past into English and have just become critically neglected. In this case, this is an original translation. This is our second original translation, both of which have been done by Stephanie Ortega, who's joining us here virtually from Austin, Texas.
Yeah.
And we're also being joined by Menachem Kaiser, who's a writer who's written about the impact of the Holocaust on his own family, and he's joining us from Brooklyn, New York. So we're coming together from several different points, and so I just will start with a little presentation about Vengeance is Mine, and then we'll turn it over to Menachem, who will talk a little bit about this. One of the challenges we have with our series is when I go look for contemporary writers to write about these books, it's pretty much guaranteed they've never heard of them. So, so it's sort of the ultimate cold call in an editorial standpoint, to have to reach out. So the fact that Menachem was willing to essentially read the manuscript of the translation and write the introduction was just a wonderful, generous gesture on his part. So I'm just going to start with a couple of slides talking about Vengeance is Mine. So we have Menachem and Stephanie joining us. Stephanie and Boiler House Press began working together back in, I think it was 2022, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Where I had written on my Neglected Books website, I had written about a book called, well, it wasn't called Red House Alley, but it was a book that had been published in the early 30s in an English translation. It was a 1909 novel written by a Jewish Austrian woman named Elsa Jerusalem, which was about the activities of a house of prostitution in Imperial Vienna in the late 19th century. And it was very radical for that time because it took a very sympathetic view to the women in the sex trade. It was banned by the Nazis and went out of print for a very long time, only recently rediscovered even in by German language readers. And I had written about it, and Stephanie reached out to me and said, "Hey, I'm working on a translation, a brand new, thorough, and unexpurgated translation of this novel. Do you know any publishers who might be interested in it?" And I said, "Well, actually, I'm doing this series." And so she was willing to work with us. And so we brought out Red House Alley. There's a copy back there if you're interested in it. It's a fascinating, amazing piece of work. And we brought that out in November 2023. And as we were finishing up and getting that one ready to come out to print, Stephanie was eager to do another project. And so we both started looking around for possible texts. And I don't actually read German. I barely speak any. I speak Tourist Deutsch, So I can ask for ein doppeltes Bettzimmer for heute Abend, and that's about it. But I started kind of just looking, and I wanted something that was relatively short as an offset to Red House Alley. And anyway, I found out about this novel, which in German is called Mein ist der Rache, which comes from the Bible verse, God says, "Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord." Um, and um, and it was struck me because the book was first published in America. It was published by Pazifische Presse, which was a German expat press based in Santa Monica. If you know anything about what was going on with German intellectuals at the time, Santa Monica, of all places, had become sort of a haven for many German intellectuals like Thomas Mann and Bertolt Brecht and many others, but also sort of more minor figures like Friedrich Torberg, who was an exile from Austria. He had been a writer in Vienna and in Prague. He was a Jew. He got out of Germany and Austria in 1938, eventually ended up in America. And he wrote this little novella, Mein ist der Rache, um, which came out, as you can imagine, not a lot of people buying German language books in America in 1943. So outside of the German expat community, nobody really much knew about it. After the war, it did come out in 1947. It was published in Berlin, but it wasn't really known as well known as a book. There was another edition in 1986, and then finally in 2008 it came out again, and it sort of got some traction at that point as, well, this is really a remarkable book, and I think it is quite a remarkable book. So, one of the things that encouraged me is as I started doing some research, as I found out that about 7, 8 years ago, there were, as you can see, parallel translations into Spanish and Italian. The book came out. And whenever a book can be translated and do relatively well with readers in multiple languages, it's a good sign that it's a story that is not specific. I mean, it's sort of a universal story. And a number of the books that we've published in our series have, since we published them, gone on to be published in multiple languages. So that's kind of also a good sign that, yeah, we found something that really's got some traction to it. So this book it came out literally Monday was the release date, Tuesday, I guess. And this is unusual. We got a review in Kirkus Review, which is big in the book business. It's mostly read by booksellers, but we got a starred review, which is really an exceptional thing. They don't give those things out easily. And there was a review that we had recently in the UK that says essentially it's in the front rank of a Holocaust fiction. And then literally this morning, the Jerusalem Post published a long piece about this book coming out. So we have hopes that this is going to do particularly well for us. And I have to say, I mean, it's a very short book. It's really, I think in terms of length, it's about 16,000 words. It's not that long. You can read it in about an hour and a half or so. But I think what's remarkable is, well, the writer Eric Maria Remarque, who was the author of All Quiet on the Western Front, said that it had one of the most electrifying and surprising endings in world literature, and it is literally in the last sentence or two, you go, "Oh my gosh." And I won't give away. I'm not much for spoilers. I don't have spirit of spoilers, but this is a case where the spoilers are not worth giving away. So let me start by turning it over to Menachem, who is joining us from Brooklyn. And let me just highlight him.
Hello, am I audible?
Yeah, let me just stop. Yes, great. We
Okay.
can hear you.
Thanks so much.
Welcome.
Okay, great. I can't actually see you, Brad.
No,
But
you can see the store.
yeah,
Oh, and you're not missing anything and not seeing me.
yeah, it's a great pleasure. I really appreciate it. I'll also mention I didn't realize this before when Brad asked me to come on this particular night. It's the second night of Passover.
Yes.
I'm actually standing up from a Seder, and so I'm wearing
Oh,
the traditional garb for the Seder, which is called the kittel, which is really fun. It has little rhinestones on it. So I decided, why would I take it off for this event? I'll just keep it on. Um, yeah, no, it was sort of Brad sort of really said it right. It was really out of the blue. I never heard of the book. I not heard of the writer. My background is I'm not an academic. I wrote a memoir about my time trying to reclaim property in Poland. But and I've spent quite a bit of time in Eastern Europe, mostly in Lithuania and Poland, and have been sort of steeped in Holocaust literature. And I'm always very alive to the question of distance. When the sort of a body of text is written, how does it grapple not only with the event, but also with what's been written in the interim? And so, how does it respond to the genre itself? And so, because literature is an ongoing conversation of all the books that have been written before yours. And so reading this one, which is it's almost like a pre-Holocaust memoir, and sort of understanding that it was written in 1943 is really kind of mind-blowing. And I had never encountered. I read it totally blind. I actually didn't even look up who he was. I knew none of the backstory, and it is rare to encounter a work like this ever, let alone a sort of one that sort of memorializes the Holocaust. And it is written with such sort of I don't really know how to describe it other than it's an electric work, and really kudos to Stephanie for such an extraordinary translation.
thank you.
And it's and it's also I very to me I'm very fond of South American literature. I don't read Spanish, and this it reminded me quite a bit of some of my favorite South American writers who approach sort of the events that they're writing about with a sort of heavy philosophical bent that absolutely does not get in the way of narrative. And so it starts sort of braiding these very, very heavy philosophical questions into the narrative itself, which by the end of even midway and certainly by the end, you're in such, the mode is such it's almost pure inquiry of not only what is the stories happening, but what is the meaning of the story. And I've seen, over the last few generations, especially, my grandparents were Holocaust survivors, and now even the generation after me, people whose great grandparents were in the war, have really tried to grapple with how to sort of memorialize the event in literature. And often it becomes like, what is the meaning of the event? And how do we sort of remake that meaning? How do we re-encounter? And today being Passover, the sort of the central precept is to sort of transmit the story and make it anew. And so the biblical verse is "V'higadat levincha b'yom," and you should tell your children about what happened. And so the rabbis teach that not only should you tell the story as it happened, but the commandment is to imagine yourself that it actually happened to you. And they say, how? And growing up, I grew up in a very strict Orthodox household, and it was always understood in sort of like in ways I could never really relate to. And like, how do you actually imagine yourself? And so we would tell the story of the Exodus of Egypt in a literal way, in a historical way. And as I've gotten older, I've realized the question is actually a literary question. It's a question of literature. How do you sort of project? How do you inhabit? How do you recreate a world? And this book, which that Brad has so generously brought to a wider audience, really recreates in a way that I've rarely seen before. It's like alive not just to the space, but to sort of like the questions, the panic, the tension. I and so I guess yeah, I'm just really I feel so honored to be a part of this project, and really so excited to be able to have contributed in my own tiny way.
Thank
Can
you
you
so
hear,
much for that. Yes,
can you hear me?
Yes.
yes, we can.
I'll have to say, reading your essay was a very evocative experience for me. Um, I had read your book and I suggested your name to Brad to write the introduction, just because I felt uh, you had a sensibility that could make this alive, and you took it in an immensely different direction than I had imagined by saying that at first, as a kid growing up, you didn't really have that kind of connection or relation, but you had, as an older person, come to begin to imagine it through not just your visit to Poland and your research for your family, but through reading literature. That struck me. Yeah.
Yeah, I just do, my yeah, I'll just explain to those who haven't read it yet. So my grandparents were Holocaust survivors, and the Holocaust was an omnipresent part of my childhood. Um, I would say I certainly didn't know any non-Jews, and I would say 90 to 95% of my friends, their grandparents were survivors, which just meant it was sort of a banal reality of all of our lives. Didn't feel exceptional in any way. It was really just built in. I didn't know my grandparents' story, and we didn't even feel that curious, to be honest. There was no imperative. There was no burning questions. And yeah, the tool kit that I've sort of developed is one that's a literary one. And so it's really literature that sort of helped me inhabit and sort of create those questions. And books like this are like just like a really special access point.
I'm really pleased that that you're a part of this project. Yeah, I came after the war. I was a war baby, and the family was German speaking from Ontario. And I had one Jewish grandfather who had died just before I was born. And so I was always deeply conflicted about, I hate the word, but what's the identity, you know? Um, the Holocaust was really shuffled under the rug, as was the fact that we were Germans and German speaking. Um, yeah, and I grew up as a goy. Um, it was actually through literature that I too was first shaken, because as a kid after the war, we were all marched into the auditorium to watch these gruesome newsreels, and I had to tune out. I had to tune out. And then as a high school kid, and this was kind of like my backhanded revenge, through the Council of Churches, I got a scholarship to go live in Germany. So I went through high school in Germany. And the person with whom I was placed, the family with whom I went through high school, they had been deeply involved in Nazism. They were Nazis. In fact, they ended up in prison in old age because they were still sending out Nazi literature. And that's when it really struck me. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's when I,
Stephanie, how did you first encounter this book? This
it was Brad. He and I were kind of on the lookout for something that I could translate, because after this first project, which was about a girl who grew up in a brothel in Vienna, I was actually quite depressed. Um, um, yeah, he was the one who found it and sent me the book. He sent me the original. I don't know how he found it. Brad, how did you find that book?
The miracle of the internet.
Yeah, but then you sent me a copy.
Yeah, well, I mean, I bought it. I found a copy from a, antiquarian book dealer that wasn't too expensive, because it is still pretty much an unknown book.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was able to buy it. I don't think that will be so easy to do now.
Yeah.
So I took it on good faith because Brad and I had really, I think, collaborated very well on the first book. And after translating it, the power of Torberg's uh, story really gripped me, and I started looking at his personal at his family. If you look at the translator's note, I got into this genealogy thing in German and found that his mother and his sister died in 41, and he was writing this in 42. So he very well knew what had happened. At the time,
Torberg's family.
the government represented going to Theresienstadt, which is Theresien, as a sort of a luxury spa for the elderly. And so his mother and his sister went together. She accompanied her mother because she was not well. And then they were transported to Łódź or Lotz and murdered. I hate to use the passive. I mean, the Nazis uh, executed them in 41. Torberg must have known about that. And his mother's brother and sister and his entire family on his mother's side died while he was in Hollywood. And his father's family that following year also died. And they assumed that a lot of people that they couldn't trace also must have disappeared during the Shoah. So he was he was living in Hollywood on $100 a week with no real work. He was supposed to be a screenwriter, but he didn't know English. When Felix Guggenheim found him and said, I mean, that he was at loose ends and said, write something for us. So he wrote a fiction about a survivor and how that survivor went mad. I think how very close to the bone that was for him.
I mean, one of the things that strikes me, Stephanie, about this book is it's really unlike anything else he did. It's almost like this was the special work that he had in him.
And then, of course, a few years after, then he went to live in New York and he worked for Time magazine. They had a special publication for German emigres. He kind of diddled around with that, and he was good friends with Alma Mahler there, who set him up with his wife. She was the, what do you call it? Uh, who's the person who witnesses your wedding? So she transacted that, and soon thereafter, he returned to Vienna. In Vienna, that was in 50, 51. He never really did much else. He wrote a series of anecdotes that someone collected and published as a novel, but it's an odd kind of incoherent set of stories that sort of reframe his childhood in a very fantastical way. It's it's more like nostalgia than a any reconsideration of what had transpired, the political scene, his own huge personal loss, the change in Vienna and in Europe. There's no reflection there in his anecdotal uh, Tante Jolic stories. That was what he did for the rest of his life, is sort of try to reinstitute the coffee culture, the coffee house culture, which actually was in its fluorescence in the late 19th century before Torberg was born. So he was reaching back to a time literally out of mind to reinvent Vienna for himself in a strange way. I'm certainly not sitting in judgment of his desire to come to, and I hate that too because it's so cheap to come to terms with what had transpired. And I talked a lot.
No, that's wonderful. Thank you, Stephanie. Stephanie, did you want to read a little bit from your translation to give folks a sense of this?
Yeah, I can do that. I'll start at the very beginning. Um, so this has no chapters. This novella is a story within a story. Um, the beginning is from the nameless narrator of the frame story. On a foggy day in November 1940, I had occasion to stand on the pier in New Jersey to wait for friends from Europe. It was the fourth time I was there, and for the fourth time I was aware of a gaunt, hunched figure, a man about 40, roaming agitatedly through the reception hall. He went back and forth restlessly, though walking seemed difficult for him. His left leg was noticeably lame. His head was bare, and his old jacket was clearly of European cut. His miserable clothing was painstakingly clean, and his wrinkled face scrupulously shaven. They underscored the poverty of his appearance. Yet I would never have attempted to offer him money or any help, nor would I have thought to accompany him, however much I was tempted to. Whenever I entered the hall, he was there, and later on he was standing at the landing bridge, even though no more passengers were leaving the ship. It had not occurred to me on my earlier visits to strike up a conversation with him. This time, however, the opportunity to speak to him seemed almost to force itself on me. My friends, who had just arrived, had to attend to all kinds of formalities, and taking care of this process usually took hours. As I was turning around to take a walk to pass the time, he came from the landing bridge and passed me with some hesitation. "Pardon me, sir," I said. "I've seen you here on the pier rather often. Are you expecting someone in particular?" He took another step, dragging his left leg behind him with a shuffling sound, before he halted and, with some effort, turned toward me. "Someone in particular?" he asked contemplatively, while lowering his head. In fact, I had the impression he'd closed his eyes, but then I noticed his right eyelid hung lower than his left. "Someone in particular," he kept muttering. "No? Why?" "Oh, I thought maybe so. You leave again and again by yourself?" "Yes," he nodded. Assent. "Again and again." And the glimmer of a smile appeared on his face. It was arduous for him, and he was pained. He added, "If it were only that easy." And then he resumed his shuffling gait. "Do you mind telling me what you mean by that?" I was walking alongside him and kept his slow pace. "That easy," he repeated to himself, as if he had not heard my question. "There are certainly plenty to choose from. I mean, are you asking if I'm waiting for someone in particular? That is, for one particular person, or for two, or three?" He looked at me with a side glance as if he wanted to assure himself of what I was asking. I nodded. "I'm waiting for 75," he continued. for 75 people, but not one has showed up. That's why I leave alone." The way he said this did not sound the least bit odd. In fact, it sounded quite matter of fact, which was, in itself, in its own way, shocking. "Is there some way I can help you?" I asked. So after all, I did offer help. Help! He threw back his head and took a deep breath. "Were you ever in Heidenberg concentration camp?" "No," I replied. "Do you know anyone who was in Heidenberg concentration camp?" "Not that I'm aware of." "Then you cannot help me." He shook his head to signify the discussion was over. I had to stop in my tracks. He didn't notice me at all. He kept walking and left through the exit. He picked up his pace a little. I caught up to him in a few steps. "I have to be here a couple of hours. Would you mind offering me some company?" He looked up, and again his face forced a pallid smile. Would I mind? "No," he said. "Oh, no, not at all. That would be fine." We crossed the street, and I stopped at one of the little bars that lined the pier. "So you would like to know, too? You would." He looked off into space, and his voice trailed off. "What would I like to know?" "Why I keep waiting in vain. That's what." Suddenly he stood still. His head fell forward and his voice broke. "I don't know myself, and I would be glad to know. I would be glad, finally, to know." I took his arm cautiously and then pushed him through the doorway of the little bar where we had been standing. "If it's difficult for you, or if you find it's uncomfortable in any way, then you don't have to tell me anything. We can have a little something to drink and then just leave." "Difficult," he muttered. "Uncomfortable. Those words are ridiculous. No, it's not difficult for me. I should expect to remember everything from time to time. All of it." I sat down across from him and ordered some drinks. "I have to caution you, sir," he said all of a sudden. "This is not the kind of story that someone tells to pass the time, and it's not the kind of story you listen to pass the time." Well, I hadn't expected it would be. My answer seemed to satisfy him, and he nodded. "I'll do my best to tell you my story very cautiously. It probably won't be my story at all. Calling it mine would be an overstatement. I'm going to tell you what happened in Heidenberg concentration camp, and I will tell you only what is absolutely necessary about myself. I'll only tell you as much as you need to know, so that you won't think I'm out of my mind. Only a certain amount. I will retell his story as faithfully as I can, and I'll repeat it in an ongoing narrative, just as he related it to me." I didn't interrupt him when he paused. I also waited when he stared off into the darkness of the little bar or into the late afternoon fog. The rumble of heavy trucks on the street nearby pierced the dense air. The dampened howl of the foghorns came through the mist. as did the wail of the sirens of ships out on the vast gray sea. And then we shift to the center of the story, which is the narrative that the man tells to the casual visitor. The concentration camp at Heidelberg was one close to the border of Holland, in one of those empty, remote areas where the moor and the forests blend and the ground is covered with stones. It was a small camp, and not many people knew about it. Its prisoners, 500 at the highest count, were forced to break up stones. People didn't know much about it or what went on there. I think that's pretty much that's that's a good chunk of the story to start.
Right. Well, thank you for that, Stephanie. I mean, it is a hard book to kind of take a selection from because once the narrator, the man that he meets at the dock, rather, starts telling the story, it just pulls you along right to the very last sentence. And it's a just a really gripping story. Uh, Now, this was a big change from Elsa Jerusalem's German. I remember you're saying that Torberg's language is very, very straightforward German,
Well, it's mannered. He's using High German, which
right?
the German High German. There is also Austrian formal German, and both of them are sort of constructs. They're for literature. They're written. If you listen to something like the German version of NPR, people do speak in High German in those occasions, but Elsa Jerusalem's story was told in dialect, and in fact, she was part of the great old Habsburg Empire, um, where there were 50 million people, very few of whom spoke German, and her story reflected all the dialects. There was Hungarian, there were people from Galicia, there were Yiddish, a lot of Yiddish speakers, and whatever. So I learned a lot of dialect reading her old story. I was 120 years old. She actually had some speakers in her story who spoke Rotwelsch, which is something like these semi-nomadic people like the Irish travelers used to speak in Vienna. And when I've sent the story, the original German, to contemporary young people in Vienna, they say they didn't know what to make of it. They never heard of it. They couldn't read it. So it was really a polyglot conglomeration. Where Torberg uh, hewed the line. He was very conscious of using formal, proper, mannered German, and his characters, who come from different parts of Germany, we assume would speak their local dialect. Some were from Cologne, some were from Hamburg, some were from Leipzig. They all, in his stories, speak elegant High German.
Right,
So it was like two ends of the spectrum. Uh,
right,
Jerusalem was making a point of avoiding High German.
right. What was your major challenge in translating Vengeance is Mine?
Um,
Or was it pretty straightforward?
as far as language goes, it was kind of chock a blocks, straightforward. I would read a sentence and I could translate it to contemporary American English fairly easily. Um, but then every sentence kind of had its own sting in it because there was like a world of what wasn't spoken. For instance, when the commander of the camp, who had the narrator in his office, who was torturing him, who kept him in a cell and whatever, was speaking, we just had little glimpses of his conversation, but they indicated a mentality that was, to me, the reader, so gruesome and so egregious. I was just torn up.
I mean, I think that's to me, that's one of the things that strikes me about this is I think Torberg does a really good job of conveying, most of this book is actually told by this man with the limp that the first narrator encounters on the dock. And, everything he does is it just is so imbued with this reticence about and reluctance to talk about what's going on, what he experienced, and considering that that wasn't something that Torberg actually experienced himself, I thought it was remarkably sensitive to how a survivor, this was well before we had the concept of PTSD, but being aware of how survivors would find themselves tripped up and reluctant to go into details, the gory details, so to speak. And I think, he does an excellent job of stepping back from that.
Yeah, he, Torberg, the author, did stay in Zurich when he got out of Prague. He could take or he was able to get on a plane to Zurich in Switzerland, and he stayed there in some charity place, I don't know, for people seeking asylum, with a man who had been in a concentration camp. At as the person who wrote the afterward, Marcel Atze said, they spent quite a lot of time conversing. The camp that Torberg is representing here as Heidenberg is based on a real camp just outside of, or north of Hamburg on the border of Holland. It was called Esterwegen. This man that he knew had been there for a year and a half. The camp was only opened, as you had said earlier, for all kinds of prisoners, not as a death. It wasn't yet conceived of as death camp. It was open from 33 to 36. So he had very early stories of what it was to live in a camp and be tortured. And the camp, the real camp, Esterwegen, was the first camp from among the camps around Germany and Poland that had separate barracks for Jews. So the Jews' barracks here in the story were not Torberg's invention. That was historical fact.
Right, right.
So, yeah, and then, of course, at the same time, he was losing all his family, and he must have known from people who got out and who were emigres to New York and to Hollywood what was happening well before the final solution, was formalized at Wannsee.
Right,
There were systematic executions long before the late 30s.
right, right. Yeah, I mean, it's just a historical note that technically speaking, the Holocaust would refer primarily to the final solution when the Nazis made a formal decision to set up this system of death camps. The concentration camps, however, were established almost immediately upon Hitler taking power, and they were used to house essentially anybody that the regime considered undesirable. So it wasn't just Jews; it was homosexuals, communists, and socialists.
Communist. Yeah.
Jehovah's Witnesses, and so there was already by 43 there was widespread understanding that the concentration camp system was doing what it was doing. In fact, Leon Feuchtwanger's
Yeah.
author's novel, The Oppermans, has a character who spends months in a concentration camp, a very refined Jewish intellectual who is forced to, push basically a road grading wheel by hand with other prisoners, exhausting himself, which is the kind of work he wasn't at all accustomed to. So there was awareness of that, and it had been written about. What's unique about this is that Torberg sees in the mindset of the one camp commandant that he takes it sort of on his own to say, I will go ahead and deliberately try to exterminate all of our Jewish prisoners. Not through ovens or executions or anything like that, but essentially just through beatings, torture, psychological degradation, forcing them all to be in a confined space that was far too small for them. And so, in a way, in 43, even though he wasn't describing what became the final solution, he understood philosophically where the Nazis were going.
Torberg's first novel, which came out when he was incredibly young, like 22 or 23, was about the school system and a particular teacher he had who was like morbidly obsessed with him. This teacher was very sadistic and almost drove him to suicide. He wrote the novel the year that it was, what was it? 1930, the year that many young students across Germany and Austria committed suicide because of the old school system and the pressures to conform. So he had thought deeply about being driven to suicide by one sadistic person. And if you read his first novel, which appeared in 30, which was translated by Anthea Bell, a really brilliant translator. Um, uh, if you read his first novel, you see that the character Wagenseil is almost identical with the teacher who drove this young man, Gerber, almost to suicide, which was an autobiographical sketch in many ways.
Right. I just want to, if there's any questions that folks in the audience would like to ask of Stephanie or myself or Menachem about the book, we have certainly time to talk about that.
I have a quick question. So you found this book
Right.
and asked Stephanie to translate it, but how did you, if you don't actually have German proficiency, how did you know that this was something that would be worth translating?
I looked up a number of papers about it, and just from the synopsis, I got a sense that it was a really a great story, a powerful story. And so it was just instinct, to be honest. And then, I mean, Stephanie didn't like do the whole thing all at once. I think you just started on it, and we had a sense that this was a compelling story, and we decided to run with it, which meant that I then contacted the German agency that had the copyrights and got the English translation rights because it is still under copyright.
I was really interested in Menachem's approach to reading the story. He just wanted to read as a reader. He didn't want to research it. He didn't want to look into Torberg's life, the history of he just wanted to look at the story. Yeah, that's the way I started.
Yeah, and I think, that's to me, that's one of the signs of a terrific book is you don't have to have the context. You can just start on page one and let the storytelling pull you along. And this is definitely a book where the storytelling, I mean, I can't imagine. I mean, people have busy lives, but I think once you get started on this, you're going to want to finish it as quickly as you can, because it is a compelling. I mean, you sense a momentum in the narrative that will lead you to you're going to want to know, where does this go? How does
You
this come out?
you said you could read it in an hour and a half, but I had to get up and run around and do things.
Yeah, I mean, your mileage may vary, as they say, but um,
Oh.
yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I was interested in what you had to say about Tante Yolish, because I mean, I've read Tante Yolish and I've listened, I have a tape of him reading Tante
Oh, wow.
Yolish. And I always thought it was so enjoyable. And I mean, just the stories and the anecdotes and the memories he had, I just thought it was absolutely wonderful. But so I was interested in what Stephanie had to say about how it was as opposed to this work.
Well, for my own part, I will say the thing I was startled to find out that Tante Yolish, this collection of anecdotes, was published in 1975, because if you read it, it definitely comes out from something from the teens and 20s,
Yeah.
and maybe even earlier than that. And so to see that he came up with it, that far after the fact was almost shocking to me. Stephanie, did you want to, I mean, what was your own perspective about that?
He was urged to get something out. I mean, he was actively involved in theater in Vienna and in Eastern Europe. He was acting as a critic, and he was part of Pen Club. He was involved with the literati, but not writing. And some people sat him down and said, you gotta put something together as a book. It was virtually the end of his life, and he was in poor health. He was a chain smoker and had all kinds of respiratory problems. He had circulatory problems. He was not well, and it's really, to my mind, quite unfortunate that to this day in Germany, Tante Jolich is what he's known for. And everybody has to have a copy on the shelf, like they have to have a copy of James Joyce, and they never read it. But they know this was a Jewish writer from Vienna whose family perished. And so we're happy to buy the book and say we own it and we know about it. They don't know anything about his earlier work at all. Particularly, I would say the first novel that he wrote about this suicidal student who was driven to madness by his teacher. Uh, that was a real piece of literature. Yolich was not, if I can, sit in judgment.
I mean, there's really no compare. I've only read the English translation of Yolish.
Oh, I didn't realize, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's from the art. There is a very small press in, I think, San Bernardino called the Ariadne Press. It
Oh, I know
specializes
Ariadne, yeah.
in
Yeah, it specializes in
Austrian
translation.
literature. Yeah. And so it's not in English, it's not at all a popular book. But I don't know. To me, these are night and day. There's such a difference between Vengeance is Mine. It's funny, I'm about to tomorrow I start teaching a class on The Great Gatsby, and it's the same sort of thing. If you've read Fitzgerald's first couple of novels and then you read The Great Gatsby, it's like,
Where did it come from? Yeah.
where did it come from? Because it is so much better than the first two, which I think are kind of crappy. Um, but so I think it is kind of like that this might have been the one great work he had in him. Um,
When Vengeance is Mine, Mine ist die Rache, came out in German in what was it, 2008? Believe me, it was a hot potato. I have a dear friend who orders books for the largest bookseller in Baden-Württemberg around Freiburg, and it didn't sell.
I wonder if that, there is still a reluctance among German readers to embrace Holocaust literature.
I have some very sad things to say about that. There's a recent kind of fashionable trend among young people um, to say they own it, to say they've read it. I see a lot of superficial guilt there. I don't think they really are reconsidering the Shoah at all. You have to go in your high school class in any German public school on an excursion to some of the camps, and there is this ritual of crying together. It's very scripted and for me hollow. It's depressing, and then they've done it, and then it's memorialized, and then it's taken care of. Yeah, I don't think that there's a sincere interest, and certainly I would say in the academic world, there's no place for that. There are no courses on Holocaust literature. People say that they've read, Night, but
By Elie Wiesel,
there's no serious interest there.
right?
That's my perception.
Well, that's almost, I kind of wonder if this won't actually do better in English than it has done in German.
Absolutely. I'm completely sure. And therefore, I feel honored. I can't say how thankful I am to you, Brad, for having found it and having asked me to do this, because I think the word is traction. I think people will pick it up.
I think so too. And honestly, I've said to a number of people, I think it's a teachable text. I can see this in high school, and I can see not just because it's straightforward, it's clear, it's a compelling story, but it's a story that when you're done, you're going to want to talk about it with other people,
Yes.
particularly about the
Yeah,
choices
almost like
that are made.
therapeutically, you need to. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes,
And the
absolutely.
other thing is the ending. We can tell people it's a surprise, but we won't tell what the surprise is. The ending does cause you to go back and reread.
Yeah,
How did he
absolutely.
construct it so subtly, so cleverly that you are surprised
Right.
and that you get the full force of the man's madness having been through that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is in the last couple of sentences, you suddenly realize it's a completely different story than you've been thinking it was. And that's extraordinary from just a craft of how to write a story in such a way that at no point the reader thinks, I know where this is going.
Menachem, are you still there?
Yep.
Yep. Can you tell us how you found the ending?
Stephanie, can you repeat that? I think you might have broken up.
Oh, I just wanted to hear Menachem's
Trying to,
response. How did he
to
find the
describe.
ending?
Unlike Brad, it's interesting. I'm I love spoiling. It's sort of this. When I was doing publicity for my own book, and moderators were like, "I don't want to spoil anything." I was like, "Spoil away." Um, and it never like struck me as sort of a to me like the quality of a book should be good despite spoilers. And this book is one of the few exceptions where it's not like because it's not just purely like an event that happens that you don't see coming. It's the entire sort of the nature of the inquiry, the nature of the narrative starts twisting in on itself in a way that is really I've never seen anything like it. So I don't want to give away too much about it. To be, the first I read it twice, in sort of quick, like what sequentially. I found myself very confused, actually, in a way that I found it was, and it's not the sort of thing I take out very often from reading this kind of book. Um, and I had to reread it. I had to reread it to sort of like stabilize like what was going on, what was happening. And so that doesn't mean it wasn't pleasurable is a strange word to use in this context, but it's very destabilizing, I think is the word I would use.
Yeah.
And throughout, you felt that it wasn't like a punch at the end.
It totally is. It is absolutely sort of like a punch. I actually think it's I like the best endings. It's both surprising and inevitable. As
Yeah.
in, yeah, as in if you sort of like take a step back, you're like, what could you have done? What could the writer have done differently? And you're like, oh, he could have. There's not a false move. But it's yeah, it especially one like, and I didn't when I first read it, I didn't actually realize it was written in 1943. I thought it was written
Wow.
1942. So I thought it was written well after the war. I came in with literally zero context. And so I thought, my first read, I thought it was sort of this like highly intelligent, highly creative approach to how memories are formed and how
Pardon?
like to sort of how the memory is formed as like transmission of the memory, and sort of how it gets passed down, especially with the framing of the man, being on the docks. And so then, rereading it with that context, it becomes like something astonishing. It's almost prophecy.
Yeah, it's a good way of putting it. I mean, when you know how this story ends and you reread it, you see that it's all put together to have that outcome. But as you're reading it for the first time, you don't have a clue that that's where it's going to go. Well, okay, we're over our hour here. Are there any other questions from folks in the audience? I hope we've tempted you to take a look at it. Let me just open up to Menachem and Stephanie if you have any last thoughts that you want to share with the folks here tonight.
Yeah, just to express my gratitude for being part of the project. It's a real honor.
Thank you, Menachem.
I feel that too. Yeah, very much. It's a
Well,
pleasure to meet you too. Thank you for taking the time away from your family and the celebration this evening.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, thank you both. And if vengeance to try, vengeance is mine a try. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care. Good evening, Menachem, and good evening, Stephanie.
Good evening. Thank you, Brad.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Pleasure.